Hello, everybody. Welcome to my session. Thank you for joining me. I want to show you the fundamentals in Power Automate and adaptive cards for Teams. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. And let's dive right in. First of all, of course, I want to give a big thank you to the organizers, Tomek, Edita, and Martin. They host some great events. So hopefully we will be joining them in some real life events very soon, as soon as COVID-19 has been getting some more control. At the beginning of the year, we already did a great virtual event. So check the Twitter handle SPS Warsaw for previous recordings, and, and let's join up as soon as possible. I want to show you some information about me. So let me introduce myself. I am a Microsoft 365 enthusiast, a citizen developer. I do very little coding myself. I only do like the drag and drop part of developing business applications, and you can get very far with that in the Power Platform. And so, especially with my skills, it's good to be working with the Power Platform. I work at InSpark, which is a company in the Netherlands, in the Amsterdam area. We are Microsoft partner for quite some years now, and my team, the business process automation team, focuses on the Power Platform with regards to other options within Azure. So if you ever are in the Netherlands, please reach out, visit our office, and let me show you how we have automated some parts of our office. And please link to me any way possible that you would like, Twitter, LinkedIn, my blogs. In my free time, I spend a lot of time with my family. And whenever I hit a snag within my projects for customers, I take a moment to drive my bike, clear my head, and then I'll probably find a solution for any issue that I have. In my session for today, I want to focus on 5 topics. The first topic is the Power Automate and the settings that you have in it. We will focus on the experimental features, which we will be enabling for our demo. And then I will compare some features to the current features that you probably have. And the second topic will be on adaptive cards, the basics. So we go to the adaptive cards website and I'll show you some information. The third topic is on adaptive cards related to Power Automate. So we're going to do some real example, doing a use case for approval in the Microsoft Teams channel. And in the last topic, I'm going to use that same use case to show you my workaround for being able to reply on adaptive cards, which is currently not possible out of the box. So yeah, let's start with the first topic, the Power Automate settings. I'm going to show you my environment. And within that environment, let me open up my demo environment. And let's start by going to looking for a template. And the one with the Teams connector for the adaptive card for lead collection started by a button. I'm going to use that one. And that one I'm going to create just like this. And after I've created it, it's a very simple flow. It just has some examples. And within this example, you just have 2 steps. You post an adaptive card and wait for a response, and you post a message. Let's try to save it from the template. A template is a very convenient way to get to know the functionalities. When I try to save it, it gives me an error. And this error flow checker, it gets better every few months. So definitely try to use it as much as possible. And for now, it just wants the team, of course, but it needs to post a response and it needs a channel. So let me use one of my demo teams and one of my demo channels. This one for the adaptive card. And the second action, let's use the same theme, but let's use a different channel, just for example purposes. Okay, now we're able to save. And the first thing I want to show you before we test it, we will test it later on. I want to show you the settings. Let's close this one. Show you the settings of Power Automate. These are my individual settings. So I'm going to choose a language, choose a local format, and I'm going to enable the experimental feature just to get some basics on this experimental feature. Turn it on, save, and the page reloads. So that's why it's important to save the flow, otherwise you lose your changes. And as you can see, now the adaptive card has a button instead of a message input. So we're going to deep dive on that later. For now, I just want to show you, hey, I'm missing some info. Let me refresh the flow and go back to edit again. Now I have my theme and channel back, very good. And what I want to show you from the experimental feature, which will probably be the general available feature very soon, is using a compose action. I want to show you my example. Let's rename the compose action to the initiator. Yes. And what I very much like is this one. So I can use dynamic content from every step above in the flow. And the expression is within the same context, but in a different icon. And now within expressions, I can reference dynamic content immediately instead of switching between tabs, which is the old experience. Let me show you again. Let's go to my Power Automate settings. First save the flow, of course. Otherwise I lose my changes. Change the settings and let's turn the experimental feature off. This way, good. And let us see what the compose action looks like now. So the dynamic content expression, not with icons, but in the same pop-up. And within that pop-up, it is very troublesome to reference dynamic content within my expression. You can see here, it's not showing me all possible dynamic content. So I had to switch tabs, and then when I would lose information, it could be a very headache sometimes. So that's why I very much like the experimental feature where you have those icons. Let me switch back for one last time because we're going to use the experimental feature in the demo for today. Save it. And then we see the very cool option to have those icons. Okay. Let's go back to the agenda. Using the experimental feature, I'm going to show you these topics. For now, I'm going to show you some basics on adaptive cards. And one very good tip is to use the adaptive cards website. So let me type in the link of the adaptive card website, adaptivecards.io, and show you some basics on the adaptive card. So the adaptive card basically is like a UI snippet. And the user interface can be platform independent. So on multiple devices, multiple platforms, multiple OSs, it has the same layout. And Teams has its own special place within the adaptive cards where you see some documentation that Microsoft provides and some samples. You can code and see how it works in your flow, in your Power Automate adaptive card post. So check out this site, check out the documentation, which provides a lot of info. And it's a very good place to start and to get some in-depth knowledge on adaptive cards in general. Using the samples is a very good way to learn interactively how the code of JSON, which is the JSON notation, interacts with the user interface that is delivered. So let's search on due date that I see in my adaptive card. And then I see here also the same set due date text in my code. And when I click on try it yourself, you will see that a page opens where you will see the card payload, which is like the code that you can copy and paste within your flow. And you here also see the target version. So it's a warning that in this designer it's 1.3, but usually in Teams 1.2 is the moment currently supported version. So again, I'm going to search for due date and then see here the show card properties. And in the designer, in the JSON code, I will also see the same due date properties. So you have some designer interface where you can see immediately changes. If you change some of the code, you immediately see the effect. Just try it yourself. Use any sample that you want. There are several good examples to discover some functionalities. Copy it and then paste it, for example, like this. In the experimental future, you can paste it here in the adaptive card button. You have a special card payload editor sample where you can paste the example that we just copied. Let me just Control A, Control V. Yes, paste it here. My the example that I just copy pasted. It has some variables in it because we copy pasted it from another. We can save it, but let's not save it because then we lose our real example. And that's the way that you should check on the adaptive card designer. So short recap: check the website, check the sample section, see what the designer does, change it, immediately see the effect in your preview, and then copy and paste it to your flow, and then you have a head start. Okay, the next topic. We have some basics on Power Automate. We have some basics on adaptive cards. Now we're gonna see how those basics in adaptive cards relate within the Power Automate experimental user experience. Okay, let's go back to the flow. Here. Let's go back to the flow we just created, and let's do a test run. Let's run it. Continue, run flow. And let's see what happens. Let's open up the flow that's currently running. You see it's still in a running status. That's because the post and wait for a response action. You see my currently my demo email. The post action, it waits for a response. So your flow will keep in this running state until the response is collected. And this is a very important topic because there's like a runtime limit. I always say to my customers, keep it within 25 days to complete the flow. And if it cannot complete within 25 days, Microsoft will error out your flow because it will then cancel the running flow because it exceeds the runtime limit. So let's see what happens when you go to the themes, see what the flow does. Here you see it posts in my general channel an adaptive card. And that adaptive card requires some input, like first name, last name, an email address. These are the things that you can define within your JSON definition, your card payload. If you want to change it, just use the designer. Let me just fill out this form, PowerPoint made, and click on submit. So there it is. Now the response has been submitted. I love this new conversation user experience. Prevents us from replying instead of doing new messages. Okay, go back to our flow. And you see what our flow does in the last stage. It posts a message to a channel. And it's not the general channel because we changed it to another channel. In the flow, we defined that the message reply, the last action, let's go back one step, is to another channel, the befindingen channel. Let's see it here. And here you see another post, which is not waiting for a response. So that's a good difference to see between those two actions. So it's not waiting for a response. The flow completed, and it just posted the message here. And in this message, we have all the details of the response of the adaptive card. So very good. Then the flow is finished. These are the outputs of the adaptive card post. And then we use that output in the last message post. You see all the details. Okay, so let's go back to the flow and change it a little bit. Because in the new user experience, we see, open up, action, you see the button. And in this button, we're gonna edit the adaptive card. But we cannot add any dynamic content here. So let me use a compose action. I'm gonna paste the JSON payload in here. I'm gonna copy it from my designer. And paste it here in my compose action. And then you see the actual JSON definition of the payload, the card payload of the post an adaptive card action. And what I want to do is I want to use dynamic content from previous steps in my flow to personalize the experience. And I'm not able to do that within the current experimental version of the adaptive card designer incorporated within Power Automate Flow just yet. Probably will soon. But for now, let's use the text in the adaptive card here and add dynamic content in the name of the username. And the email just gave me a word result, so I'm going to use the username now and save the flow. You see that I cannot reference any dynamic content here. There's no option here. There's no pop-up stating that I can use information from my flow. So what I do is I copy paste my compose action output here, copy it, go to the adaptive card designer, open the payload designer, paste it, my code from my compose action, which I verified because then it will be working. And then you see that this is the notation with the at and the accolades to have any output from previous actions. So this will probably be incorporated in the designer, but for now you will not be able. So I use this best practice where I use a compose action and then reference that compose action or copy paste that compose action within the themes action. In the old way, so let's turn off the experimental future just for a reference. In the old way, I would not copy paste the compose action because it's like a double duplicate of information, as you can see here. I would just reference the output directly from the compose action. But let me show you what happens when you're going to use the experimental future, which will probably be the real one in a short period of time. Go to Power Automate settings. There. And let's turn the experimental future back on again. And then let's go to the adaptive card post action, edit the adaptive card, and you see this error where it says it cannot load the JSON because I'm referencing a compose action. It cannot read that it's actually JSON and it can provide us with the details. So for now in the experimental future, what I often do, let me add a comment here to make sure that if I deliver it to my colleagues or to a customer, it knows why I've added this compose action. This is the JSON of the adaptive card. And I also want to use this compose action for troubleshooting because as we saw earlier, when the flow is running, we cannot see the adaptive card action itself because it's in a running status and it's the actual action that's running. So we cannot see anything in it. But when I use this compose action, I can troubleshoot the input to see what's actually gone in the adaptive card while the flow is still running. So then again, let's copy this JSON, go to the payload editor, paste it, Control V, minimize it. Then you see the example with the dynamic content in the right way. It's also very good to notice that any input that you have in your adaptive card has an ID. and I'm gonna reference this later, so keep this in mind. Keep it safe. Let us test it again. Okay, test perform trigger action, run flow. There it is. Okay, and now in this run, I see the JSON, which has gone into the next action, and I will see my dynamic content here with the actual value. See, requested by Django Lohn. And this is very handy because if you have a lot of running flows waiting for responses in adaptive cards, I cannot see the actual content when the other flow is still running. And let's have a look at how this looks like in Teams. Here it is. And then you see requested by Django Lohn also. Okay, now let's provide us another example to finish the flow of my good friend Tony Stark. And finish it up. Phone number. He is interested in Azure services. Okay, submit. Let's go back to the flow, which should have been finished by now. There it is. Now I have the input and output of the adaptive card. And as you can see, again, no real input. So another great advantage of using the compose action before this action. But I do have the output. And as you saw, I can use that output in next steps, because this action is referencing the ID field that I showed you earlier of the adaptive card action, which do not show up as dynamic content. Not yet. It will probably will be in the next few versions. But for now, look at this notation. And I often copy this content. Just select all, Control A, Control C to copy it. And I paste it in something like Notepad or Visual Studio. And then I can see the real code behind it. And then you see again the same notation for referencing dynamic content. You see the name of the action, and then the body has data in it, and within that data it has this ID, which we determined ourselves within the card payload editor. Remember, let's see the adaptive card, reference this input, and you see the ID. That's the same. It's the same context, the same concept over and over again. It's very useful, especially for troubleshooting or when you have a big adaptive card. So, short recap. Wait for the response versus the post and the message. The wait for a response keeps waiting, and the post message just posts the response, just like any message that a person would post. Okay. So template flows are very useful for discovering functionalities or deep diving for know-how. Just pick any template that you want, check it, test it, and yeah, you learn a lot just by doing. Okay, the next topic. In the next topic, I want to show you the use case that I have, where I want to do an approval in the Microsoft Teams channel. And the flow we just created. Let's go to another flow I created. Here, this one I created to get an approval for the creation of a Microsoft Teams team. So anyone within the company can create a request. Sorry. And what I did is I created a Power Apps app for it. And I posted that Power Apps app within the Teams team itself. So I'm going to show you. I just added a channel in this here. And let me open up the Power App full screen for a better experience. So this is a very simple Power App, a responsive Power App I created, which provides like a wizard experience for someone who wants to request a team. And then we can have templates behind it, which we define ourselves. And then a team is provisioned using a template definition that we can, as a customer, define ourselves instead of the default teams, the option we have. So I created a template, a Microsoft Teams team template with specific private channel in it and extra channels. I'm going to show you later. And this is like the wizard experience. First, we ask what kind of template you want to use, what you're going to use it for. This is going to be like a department Teams team in Amsterdam. And answering these questions will lead to a unique combination of answers. That's why I request here to a unique name and a unique description of the Teams team. Request some data. We check if this Teams team already exists. This one is still available, so we can continue. If it's not available, you cannot continue. You need to change the name, for example, or the purpose. Provide an owner. Let's do myself as an owner. And I'm going to do one of my colleagues as a secondary owner. Thanks. And I'm going to give some comments for the approval process. Please approve ASAP. And that's it. Save. So now it saves an item in the SharePoint side, and a flow will be triggered on that SharePoint item. So it's a very simple concept. Okay, let's go to my flow. It can take up to 8 minutes, but let me refresh and speed up a little bit. There it is already 1 second ago. Refresh. Yes, that's the one. Okay, let's open up the run flow. So it acts on the SharePoint item. I do some variables, I do some compose actions, going to reference it later on, so don't worry. It updates the SharePoint item and it posts an adaptive card. And what it does, that's where the magic happens. The adaptive card is something like this. Let me start by the end result. There's the adaptive card. And it just shows some information about information that I put in the Power App just a minute ago. So some information about the request, some green accent to show that something needs to be done here. I have a button that I can chat, a button that I can email the requester, all some default functionalities that I found in some templates. I can reply, and this is why I like this adaptive card above an email to a team. I can reference people within my message, and they will get notified about my message, and they can see the actual content of the request without me having to email it or duplicate information. It's already there. So why send another email? Just use Teams to communicate and ask them about this request. Yes, very cool. Okay, and as you can see, if there are many posts, that's why I added the green background. This is the one that deserves attention right now. Okay, so for our demo, let's approve. Approve, and as you can see in my payload, I've determined like an image, and I can give comments, and let's approve and go for it. Up. Poof. There you see, in a second, the flow completed, it updated my adaptive card, my green background is gone, so it doesn't deserve immediate attention. My flow continues, and here you see some actions that we will deep dive in later, where I reply on my adaptive card and the fifth topic in my demo. But for now, let's go back here. You see the response there, where I provide some information about the actual response. More on that later. First, we deep dive on the flow setup and on the first adaptive card that we posted. So again, I'm going to edit the flow. I'm going to show you what's in it, some variables, some compose actions. And let's go to the adaptive card there. Okay, let's go back to this one. You see that because I'm in my experimental future, it cannot reference the output itself. So this is an old flow which did not copy pasted the payload editor yet. It referenced the compose action directly. That's what the error message that I showed you earlier. But if I copy all my content here, and I go to the experimental setting there, paste it in the payload editor, of the experimental user experience, save it. Let's see here, I get my real nice example of what the adaptive card will look like in Teams. Okay, so this is all the code. Just use the adaptive card designer to see the code that you want. I saw a notification. Let's check out the notification because probably my Teams team has been provisioned. Uh, Here, just the request that I just did. It's still provisioning, so I will get this can't access your content notification. Refreshing doesn't help. I just need to be patient some for a few more minutes where it provisions the Teams team, the SharePoint site behind it, extra channels, extra folders within the document library, all those kind of things that you get with the Microsoft Teams team. But for now, let's go back to the flow. Okay. Yes, so this is the code. It's a JSON. You should be very familiar with JSON if you want to do more with Power Automate. So don't be scared. It's just a simple notation of some information that we can use throughout the rest of Flow. Okay. The next step. So as I mentioned before, we cannot reply to an adaptive card immediately. And we cannot reference the input of the response directly within the adaptive card action itself. So I'm not able to give this information by default. I get another notification. There it is. Yeah, now it's ready. Now my Teams is provisioned completely with all the channels that I extra defined within my template. Now the general channel is opening up correctly. Forget about it. Let's hide this Teams team and focus on the flow. Hide it. Yes. Go back to flow. And here you see this is the experimental future being a little bit buggy. Just use Control Z to undo any action that you have. And I'm going to show you that this adaptive card, I can add some information in it. For example, this one. And then you can see that the flow checker gives me an error that this JSON definition is not correct. So I can fix this error very easily. Just remove the content that I just added, and now I'm back without any errors in my flow. So that's very good. A proactive error message if the JSON contains any error. Okay. To be able to reply on the adaptive card, I update the adaptive card with like a unique identifier. And I use the same concept again, where I compose a unique identifier in a step above, this one. And it just consists of a unique combination of the moment. It's something like this, where I format, oh, lost some data. Just used Control Z again, Control Z, that it's back again. Just click the expression, and then you see my expression where I convert the UTC now time, which is the default time in Power Automate, and I convert to another time zone. And there's like a default Microsoft documentation page about all the time zones. And there you can find, for example, in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, for me, I need to use w.Europe Standard Time to get the real time that I want from my unique reference. Go back to the flow. You can see that I format the output in year, month, date, hour, minute. And the second part is the unique URL combination that we built in the Power App. And the combination of this information is meaningful to end users. And that's why I post this information as a reply to the adaptive card, because and it's unique and it gives information like this. Let's see this one. It gives information like this, which says, hey, it's the department in Amsterdam unique requested at that moment, and we can have some identifier for other steps that we probably need later on in the flow. Okay, so we use that unique combination to find our adaptive card post. More on that later on in this demo. Um, we reference that output in the update message action, and that is a very good tip from me if you want to reply on your adaptive card later on. But first, I want to show you the right side of my parallel stream, because if I scroll up a little bit, you see that I have like a parallel flow within this flow. The left side is posting the adaptive card, and the right side is the do until action. And the purpose of this do until action is to send reminders about the pending adaptive card response. So I reference this output here, so admins can easily change the number of days that we want to wait. For now, it's 4 days, and it delays that parallel flow within this flow. It gets the item that triggered to get its current status, because if it has been responded, the status is changed on the left side of the flow. On the right side of the flow, I use that status to determine if this loop has finished or not, because it's a loop that repeats every 4 days. And I add a condition where it says if the status of the variable, which is the status of the SharePoint item, is pending, I'm gonna increment this number from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, etc. And I'm gonna compose an email that I want to send, and I'm gonna use the send an email v2 action to send the actual email to anyone that I have defined as a reminder receiver. Again, at the top of the flow, so an admin can easily change who should receive the reminders. And the body of the email is something like this. Just go to Teams, preferencing the group ID and the channel ID, and then I can send an email that sends a reminder, referencing Teams, and then in Teams they should respond as soon as possible. That's the concept of this do until leap. So let me just add a comment here for my fellow Power Platform flow creators. This is just to send a reminder to people and make them check Teams as soon as possible. Okay, save it, and let's see what happens. There it is. Not saved. There's one small bug in the v2 action, is that it tries to make HTML of every text that you put in the action, but I already did it, so it's not needed. So when you open up the v2 action, make sure that you remove any additional HTML before saving it again. Otherwise, you get very strange HTML when referencing compose actions that include actual HTML. Okay, so that's the whole purpose of the do until action. Just send reminders, redirect people to Teams, and make them reply to the adaptive card as soon as possible. Okay, now go back to the left side of the flow. We cannot include information about the response within the adaptive card itself during the first action where we post the reply. So I cannot say that I want to reply on the adaptive card from the flow with information from the actual response itself, like this. It's approved, this is the text that I typed, and this is the number of reminders that I gave. That's why I add this unique identifier. And that unique identifier will give us the option to update the message with that identifier here. And that unique identifier will give us the opportunity to find our adaptive card and have that information available. And that's where we're going to continue, because that's where we're going to continue on our last point of the agenda, replying on adaptive cards. And when replying on adaptive cards, it's not possible out of the box. So I'm going to show you a workaround, a pattern that I came up with, and it involves a few steps. And I'm broken down the steps as much as possible. And what it does, it gets the messages of the Microsoft Teams channel. So again, I reference a lot of compose actions at the top of the flow. So if I want to change the Teams channel from team A to team B or channel A to channel B, I can just reference it at the top, change it once, and all these related actions that reference the same ID of the teams and the same ID of the channel do not need any update on itself. It can be a lot of work if we approach it like that. So that's why I do this compose action at the top, determine the group ID, and then reference it in other actions. So when we get all those messages of that specific Teams channel, the first thing we're going to do is filter those messages on this property, the application identity type, because when it's an adaptive card posted by the Teams bot, this property is equal to bot. So we get like all 100 messages that we have in the Teams channel, but only 10 messages were done by the bot. Because if an actual person, and I love this new user interface, the new experience where you cannot uh, start a new conversation as if you are replying, a mistake that I often make even in the current user interface. But when a person starts a new message, so a message not from a bot, and you can see the difference between the two, is that that property that we just said, that's not equal to bot. So from the 100 messages that are in this channel, I now have the 10 messages posted by the Teams bot. And those messages I'm going to filter again, because an adaptive card is considered as an attachment of a message. So I have this property that says attachments of the Teams messages, and the length of those attachments should at least be 1, so greater than 0. And then I have, of the 10 bot posts that I have like the 6 posts that have adaptive cards in them. And the last step that I want to filter is that from those 6 messages posted by a bot with adaptive cards, is that I want to filter them on the adaptive card identifier that we created ourselves, that we know which is unique. Then I take the first one of these filtered items. So of the 6, I have 1 item left because it's a unique identifier that we created ourselves up here. Yes, there. And that's this one. And because we know this one is unique, I now have 1 message left. And from that message, scroll down. There it is. Here. From this message, I want the property is the message ID. So the content that we have, which should deliver only 1 message left because there's only 1 item with our unique identifier. And I'm going to filter the first one of my response with the ID of the message, because the ID of the message is what we need if we want to reply on it. So by default, Microsoft should deliver us in the output of the first action. More on that later. But this is a pattern, a workaround to get that message ID, because that's the ID that we need to respond on the adaptive card post that we've done. There, you see, I just referenced the output again. And this is the response that I get, referencing information from the rest of the flow. So Django responded with approved, with the comments, and then with the number of reminders that it took. Very basic, but it's one complete flow. The next steps, of course, could be like a condition on an approval where it says if it's rejected, do this. If it's approved, do that. I haven't done anything like that just yet, but you can say that I want to send an email to the approver as an extra step. If you want to limit the email, just post a response through Teams to the user saying that we rejected or approved. and maybe even an adaptive card with some nice information. But for now, nothing like that. The last step in the flow, which is very important to get the flow out of the do until loop, is to update the SharePoint item with its status from pending to approved or rejected, and then the do until loop will finish and this flow will finish. That's a very important step. Let's go to a completed run and see the compose information. Let's see the reply. This is the unique identifier that we saw. Just a short recap. The message that it get updated. You see output of the response. As you can see, no input. So use the compose JSON action at the top to show us what the actual adaptive card looked like. There's no way to find out now after the completion of the flow. And then we have the reply to the adaptive card, where we define the information that we want based on the message ID. And that brings us back to the message ID. So a lot of trouble to get that message ID, while Microsoft knows what the ID is because the adaptive card here, it has an ID, right? Otherwise, there's no Teams channel. So let me shamelessly promote my blog again, where I've done a post on this pattern. Let me show you my blog. It's very simple. I just post every few weeks a few blogs about the Power Automate or Power Apps, Common Data Service, the Power Platform in general. And here I have to post about adaptive cards where I explain and give you all the formulas that I have, just for a later reference if you want to check it out later on, about this pattern where you reply on adaptive cards. And again, Microsoft should give us the message ID itself. So please vote on my ID, where I, again, shamelessly promote my ID. Vote on it, keep it up, so it gets high on the priority list of Microsoft. And then hopefully it gets implemented soon and my workaround will not be needed anymore. So that's the fifth topic. The workaround I want to share. Please vote again on my ID. Check out my blog. Reach out anytime you want. I want to thank you for joining my session. And again, a big thank you to the organizers. It puts a lot of effort to organize these kind of sessions. So big thank you to, again, Tomek, Edita, Machin. Feel free to ask me questions, commenting on the link on the recording. I will answer them as soon as possible. Hopefully, I will see you on the on-site events somewhere in 2021, probably the soonest in 2021. Maybe another virtual event in the near future. I love virtual events, but the on-site events have their special feeling. So hopefully, we'll see each other in one of the on-site events. Just keep following the SPS Warsaw Twitter handle, for example, and keep updated by the organizers. Then hopefully see you in the future. Thank you again for watching. Stay safe. Till next time.